Hi, I'm Karen. 2 months ago, I sat in my OBGYN's office staring at an ultrasound image that would change everything. At 12 weeks pregnant with my first child, I was finally ready to share the news with my family. What I didn't expect was my sister Rachel's reaction when she saw the sonogram photo. She looked at it, laughed, and said, "Really, Karen? You think bringing a baby into this world is going to fix your pathetic excuse for a marriage?" What she didn't know was that my husband David wasn't just another Air Force officer stationed overseas. He was a three-star general commanding strategic operations across the Pacific Theater, with access to resources that could move mountains. And when that video call came through during what should have been our family celebration, the room fell silent for all the wrong reasons. What happened next didn't just expose Rachel's cruelty. It revealed a pattern of systematic harassment that had been building for years, targeting not just me, but other military families in our community.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning sickness hit me like a freight train at exactly 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I barely made it to the bathroom before my stomach emptied itself with the kind of violence that left me shaking and dizzy. David had been deployed for 3 months by then, stationed at a classified location somewhere in the Pacific, and the house in Colorado Springs felt impossibly large and empty as I knelt on the cold tile floor. I'd suspected for weeks that something was different. The exhaustion that no amount of coffee could touch, the way certain smells made my stomach lurch, the tenderness that made even my softest bras feel like torture devices. But military wives learn to be practical about these things. False alarms are expensive, both financially and emotionally, so I waited until I was certain before spending money on a pregnancy test. The two pink lines appeared almost instantly, bold and undeniable against the white plastic. I stared at them for a full 5 minutes, waiting for them to fade or change or reveal themselves to be some kind of optical illusion. They didn't. After 3 years of marriage and countless conversations about starting a family when the timing was right, the timing had apparently chosen itself. David's communication schedule was strictly regulated due to his security clearance. We had designated windows twice a week when he could make secure calls, and even then, our conversations were limited to 30 minutes and monitored for any discussion of operational details. I spent the next 4 days carrying this secret, alternating between euphoria and terror, counting down the hours until I could share the news that would transform us from a couple into a family. When the call finally came through, I'd prepared everything perfectly. The ultrasound appointment was scheduled, the prenatal vitamins were already lined up on my kitchen counter, and I'd even bought a tiny Air Force onesie to show him through the video feed. David's face appeared on my laptop screen with that careful, neutral expression he wore during deployment calls, the one that said he was present, but part of his mind was always calculating risks and analyzing threats. "You look different," he said immediately, his sharp eyes catching something in my expression that I thought I'd hidden. "Good difference. What's going on?" I held up the pregnancy test, watching his face transform from professional composure to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "Surprise, General, you're going to be a father." The silence that followed wasn't the stunned quiet. It was the deep, meaningful pause of a man processing information that would reshape every priority in his life. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "How long have you known?" 4 days. I wanted to tell you properly, not just blurt it out during a random conversation. I angled the laptop so he could see the ultrasound photo I'd propped against a coffee mug. 12 weeks along. The due date is October 15th. David leaned closer to his camera, studying the grainy black and white image like it was a tactical map that required careful analysis. October 15th. I'll make sure I'm home for that. Whatever's happening here, wherever they want to send me next, I'll be there when our baby arrives. We spent the next 25 minutes planning everything from nursery colors to college funds, our voices overlapping with excitement as we tried to fit months of conversation into the limited time we had. It was the kind of call that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him in the first place, His ability to be completely present in a moment, to make me feel like the most important thing in his world, even when the weight of command rested on his shoulders. "Have you told anyone else yet?" he asked as our time began to run short. "Not yet. I wanted you to be the first to know. But I'm thinking of having a small family gathering this weekend, maybe inviting Rachel and Mom over to share the news." Something flickered across his expression, too quick for me to interpret fully. "How do you think Rachel will react?" It was a loaded question, and we both knew it. My relationship with my older sister had been complicated for as long as I could remember, marked by a pattern of competition and criticism that had only intensified since my marriage to David. Where I'd found love and stability, Rachel had endured a series of failed relationships and career disappointments that she seemed to blame on everyone except herself. "She'll probably make some sarcastic comment about military wives and unplanned pregnancies," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But she'll come around, she always does." David's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but our time was up. The secure connection would terminate automatically at the 30-minute mark, so we exchanged quick declarations of love and promises to talk again in 3 days. The screen went dark, leaving me alone in my kitchen with the overwhelming reality that I was carrying our child. The next few days passed in a blur of research and preparation. I devoured pregnancy books, downloaded apps that would track the baby's development week by week, and started a journal to document every milestone for David to read when he returned. The morning sickness continued with clockwork precision, arriving each day at almost the same time, and leaving me nauseated but oddly reassured that everything was progressing normally. I scheduled the family gathering for Saturday afternoon, choosing a time when the lighting in my living room would be perfect for taking photos of everyone's reactions. Mom confirmed she could make the drive down from Denver, and after some negotiation, Rachel agreed to come over, though not with her usual commentary about my need for attention and drama. "Let me guess," she'd said when I called to invite her. "You're finally pregnant, and you need the whole family to witness your announcement because God forbid you just send a text like a normal person." The accuracy of her guess had caught me off guard, but I'd covered it with a laugh and deflected the conversation to logistics. Rachel had always possessed an unsettling ability to read between the lines, to sense exactly what buttons to push to maximum effect. It was a talent that had served her well in her career as a pharmaceutical sales representative, but it made family gatherings feel like navigating a minefield. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp spring weather that made Colorado Springs feel like paradise. I spent the morning cleaning house and preparing a light lunch, arranging everything with the attention to detail that military life had trained into me. The ultrasound photo was positioned prominently on the coffee table, and I'd prepared a short speech about timing and blessings and the joy of expanding our family. Mom arrived first, as she always did, carrying a homemade apple pie and wearing the kind of floral dress that suggested she suspected this gathering might be photo-worthy. She'd been a military wife herself before Dad's retirement, so she understood the rhythms of deployment and homecoming, the way important moments sometimes have to be celebrated in carefully orchestrated pieces rather than spontaneous gatherings. "You have that glow," she said immediately, studying my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd raised 3 daughters. "Either you're pregnant or you've discovered some kind of miracle skincare routine." I laughed and deflected, wanting to wait for Rachel's arrival before making any official announcements. We chatted about David's deployment, about the garden she was planning for her backyard, about the trivial details that filled the space between people who loved each other but didn't always know what to say.
Rachel arrived exactly 15 minutes late, which was precisely on time according to her personal schedule. She'd always operated on the principle that arriving fashionably late demonstrated importance and busyness, that punctuality was for people who had nothing better to do. She swept through my front door wearing designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her perfume announcing her presence before she even spoke. "Karen, darling," she said, air-kissing my cheek in the affected manner she'd developed since moving to Denver and working in pharmaceutical sales. "You look positively radiant, almost like you're hiding some kind of secret." The way she said it made my skin crawl, like she was already preparing to dissect whatever news I was planning to share.
But I pushed down the uneasiness and led her into the living room where Mom was waiting with expectant eyes and a camera ready to capture the moment. So, I began, picking up the ultrasound photo with hands that were steadier than I felt. I asked you both here because I have something wonderful to share. David and I are going to have a baby. Mom's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Tears of joy, immediate questions about due dates and doctor visits, plans for shopping trips and nursery decorating. She hugged me with the fierce love that only mothers possess, already mentally preparing for her new role as grandmother. Rachel's response was something else entirely. She picked up the ultrasound photo and stared at it with the kind of clinical detachment she might use to examine a pharmaceutical product sample. Her expression shifted through several phases: surprise, calculation, and finally settling into something that looked almost like disgust. "Really, Karen," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You think bringing a baby into this world is going to fix your pathetic excuse for a marriage?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The words hit like a physical slap, leaving me momentarily speechless. Mom gasped audibly, but Rachel wasn't finished. "Let's be honest here. David's been deployed for what, 3 months? And you're 12 weeks pregnant. The math is interesting, don't you think?" She set the photo down like it was contaminated. "Even if the timing works out, do you really think he's going to be home long enough to be an actual father? Or are you planning to raise this child the same way you've been living? Alone, dependent, waiting for scraps of attention from a man who prioritizes his career over his family?" The cruelty was breathtaking, but it was the calculating look in her eyes that truly frightened me. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment or sisterly rivalry gone too far. This was deliberate, designed to inflict maximum emotional damage at what should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. "Rachel," Mom said, her voice sharp with disapproval, "that's completely inappropriate." "Is it?" Rachel stood up, smoothing her expensive clothes with practiced elegance. "Or am I just saying what everyone else is thinking? Military marriages have a 70% failure rate, Mom. Military wives have the highest rates of depression and anxiety of any demographic. Karen's about to become a single mother in everything but name, and she's celebrating like this is some kind of blessing." She walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood where military families lived in identical houses, trying to build normal lives around the chaos of service and duty. "Do you know what I see when I look at this community? Broken women raising damaged children while their husbands play war games on the other side of the world. And now Karen wants to add another casualty to that statistic." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked stricken, caught between defending me and processing the venom that had just poured from her elder daughter. I felt frozen in place, holding an ultrasound photo that had transformed from a symbol of joy into evidence of my supposed naivety. "I think you should leave," I said finally, my voice surprisingly steady despite the chaos in my chest. Rachel turned back to me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, I'm just getting started. You want to know what I really think about this pregnancy? About your perfect military marriage? About the fantasy you've been living while the rest of us deal with reality?" She walked back to the coffee table and picked up the ultrasound photo again, holding it up like Exhibit A in some twisted courtroom. "This baby is going to grow up without a father, just like all the other military brats in this neighborhood. David's going to miss the first steps, the first words, the first day of school. He'll show up for graduations and birthdays when his schedule permits, and you'll spend your life making excuses for why Daddy can't be here." The words kept coming, each one precisely calibrated to hit where it would hurt most. She talked about the statistics on military children, about the psychological damage of absent fathers, about the inevitable divorce that would leave me struggling as a single mother with no career prospects and limited support. "And the best part," she continued, her voice rising with each accusation, You'll blame everyone except yourself. You'll blame the military, blame David's career, blame the system. But deep down, you'll know that you chose this. You chose to marry a man whose real wife is the Air Force, and now you're choosing to bring an innocent child into that dysfunction. Something inside me snapped, not with anger, but with a clarity that cut through all the emotional manipulation and revealed exactly what was happening. Rachel wasn't concerned about my marriage or my baby's well-being. She was performing a character assassination, using my moment of vulnerability to settle scores that had nothing to do with pregnancy or military life. "You're right," I said quietly, standing up and facing her directly. "I did choose this. I chose to marry a man who serves something bigger than himself. I chose to build a life based on love and commitment rather than cynicism and competition. And I'm choosing to have this baby with someone who will move heaven and earth to be the father our child deserves." Rachel's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. Keep telling yourself that, Karen. When you're sitting alone in this house at 3 a.m. with a crying baby and no help, remember this conversation. When David misses Christmas because of some military emergency, think about how proud you were of his service. When your child asks why Daddy loves the Air Force more than us, you can explain how noble it all is. She gathered her purse and walked toward the door, but turned back one final time. You know what the really sad part is? You could have had a real life. You could have married someone who would actually be present for your marriage and your children. Instead, you settled for someone who gives you just enough attention to keep you waiting for more. And now you're going to raise a child in that same pattern of abandonment and false promises. The door slammed behind her, leaving Mom and me sitting in a living room that suddenly felt contaminated by her presence. The ultrasound photo lay on the coffee table, innocent and hopeful, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been a celebration. "Don't listen to her," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Rachel's been angry about her own life for so long, she can't stand to see anyone else happy." But the damage was done. Every insecurity I'd ever had about military marriage, every fear about raising children in this lifestyle, every doubt about whether David's career would always come first, Rachel had found them all and twisted them into weapons designed to destroy my joy. That night, after Mom had gone home and the house was quiet again, I sat in what would become the nursery and tried to process what had happened. The attack hadn't been random or impulsive. It had been calculated, precise, designed to plant seeds of doubt that would grow and poison every moment of my pregnancy. But there was something else, something in Rachel's eyes during her tirade that suggested this was about more than sibling rivalry or personal jealousy. There had been satisfaction there, a sense of mission accomplished that made me wonder if this was part of a larger pattern I'd been too blind to see. I thought about other military wives in our community, about conversations I'd had with women who'd seemed inexplicably depressed or anxious about their marriages, about family gatherings that had ended in tears and confusion, about relationships that had been damaged by words that seemed to come out of nowhere. For the first time, I began to wonder if my sister's cruelty was random at all, or if I'd just become her latest target in a campaign designed to destroy the kind of happiness she could never achieve for herself. 3 days later, during our scheduled call, David took one look at my face through the video feed and knew something was catastrophically wrong. Military training had taught him to read situations quickly, and the careful composure I thought I'd maintained crumbled under his scrutiny. What happened? His voice carried the kind of authority that could move entire battalions, but underneath it, I heard the concern of a husband who knew his wife was hurting. I told him everything, every cruel word, every calculated attack, every moment of Rachel's systematic destruction of what should have been our celebration. David listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, processing information with the tactical precision that had earned him his stars. "Karen," he said finally, "this wasn't random cruelty. This was strategic. Rachel targeted specific vulnerabilities, our separation, military statistics,
your fears about single parenting. She did research. The observation sent chills down my spine because I'd been thinking the same thing. You think she planned this? I think she's been planning this for longer than we realized. David leaned forward, and I could see him shifting into what his subordinates called general mode, the mental state where personal emotions took a back seat to strategic thinking. Tell me, about other interactions you've had with her recently, any comments about military families, about our marriage, about the community? As I searched my memory, patterns began to emerge. Rachel's seemingly casual questions about divorce rates among military couples, her comments about the sad little wives she'd observed at base events, her interest in which of our neighbors were struggling with deployments, with money, with children. She's been gathering intelligence, David said when I finished recounting the incidents. The question is why, and whether you're her only target. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. David glanced at it, and his expression shifted into something I'd never seen before, a cold, calculating look that reminded me exactly why he'd risen to command strategic operations across an entire theater. I need to make some calls, he said. Secure channels. Can you do something for me? Of course. I want you to reach out to 3 wives in your community, Sarah Mitchell, Elena Rodriguez, and Beth Thompson. Ask them if they've had any recent interactions with Rachel. Be casual about it, but pay attention to their responses. Can you do that? The fact that he knew their names, despite being deployed for months, spoke to the level of attention he paid to our community, even from thousands of miles away. David, what are you thinking? I'm thinking your sister may have made a very serious mistake. His voice carried undertones that made my blood run cold. And I'm thinking it's time she learned that attacking military families isn't a game. The call ended with promises to speak again in 24 hours, but I could tell David was already 3 steps ahead, planning something that would make Rachel regret every word she'd spoken in my living room. The conversations with Sarah, Elena, and Beth revealed a pattern so disturbing it left me physically sick. Each woman had experienced what they'd dismissed as isolated incidents, cruel comments at social gatherings, pointed questions about their marriages, systematic erosion of confidence in their relationships and choices. Sarah's story was particularly devastating. Rachel had approached her at a community barbecue 2 months ago, armed with statistics about military suicide rates and the psychological impact of repeated deployments on children. She questioned Sarah's decision to homeschool her kids, suggested that the isolation was damaging their development, implied that Sarah was being selfish by prioritizing her comfort over her children's needs. I went home and cried for hours, Sarah admitted when I called her. I started questioning everything, whether I was doing right by my kids, whether my husband's career was worth the sacrifice, whether we were all just kidding ourselves about making military life work. Elena's experience was similar, but focused on financial anxiety. Rachel had somehow learned about Elena's husband's delayed promotion and used it as ammunition to suggest that military careers were dead ends, that Elena was wasting her prime years waiting for stability that would never come. Beth's story was the most personal. Rachel had targeted her struggles with fertility, making comments about how lucky she was not to bring children into the instability of military life, how her inability to conceive was probably a blessing in disguise. When I called David back with my findings, his reaction was swift and decisive. "She's not working alone," he said immediately. "This level of specific, personal information about military families requires coordination, planning, and resources that your sister doesn't have access to independently." "What do you mean?" "I mean, someone is feeding her intelligence about our community. Someone with access to personnel files, financial records, medical information. This isn't gossip, Karen. This is targeted psychological warfare against military families." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You think there's someone on base involved?" "I think there's someone with legitimate access who's providing information to your sister, either knowingly or unknowingly. And I think we're about to find out who." David's voice took on the tone that had made enemy commanders surrender without firing a shot. "I'm initiating a security review effective immediately. Full background checks on anyone with access to family services, medical records, financial counseling, and base social services.
If someone is leaking personal information about military families, they're going to face federal charges. The weight of what he was saying settled over me. This wasn't just about Rachel's cruelty anymore. This was about a potential security breach, about the safety and privacy of every family on base. David, what if you're wrong? What if Rachel is just really good at manipulation and this is all coincidence? Then the investigation will prove that, and we'll deal with your sister through other channels. His pause carried ominous undertones. But Karen, I've been intelligent long enough to recognize patterns. What you're describing isn't the behavior of a jealous sister. It's the behavior of someone conducting systematic psychological operations against a target population. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him typing rapidly on his secure terminal. I'm also going to have our family placed under protective monitoring. Not obvious surveillance, but I want to know if Rachel makes any attempts to contact you, approach the house, or gather additional information. You think she's dangerous? I think she's already demonstrated that she's willing to cause psychological harm to pregnant women and military families. I'm not willing to find out how far she's prepared to escalate. The call ended with David promising to have answers within 48 hours. As I sat in my quiet house, hand instinctively moving to my still small belly, I realized that what had started as a cruel family confrontation had become much larger and more frightening than I could have imagined. The conversations with Sarah, Elena, and Beth revealed a pattern so disturbing it left me physically sick. Each woman had experienced what they'd dismissed as isolated incidents, cruel comments at social gatherings, pointed questions about their marriages, systematic erosion of confidence in their relationships and choices. Sarah's story was particularly devastating. Rachel had approached her at a community barbecue 2 months ago, armed with statistics about military suicide rates and the psychological impact of repeated deployments on children. She questioned Sarah's decision to homeschool her kids, suggested that the isolation was damaging their development, implied that Sarah was being selfish by prioritizing her comfort over her children's needs. I went home and cried for hours, Sarah admitted, when I called her. I started questioning everything, whether I was doing right by my kids, whether my husband's career was worth the sacrifice, whether we were all just kidding ourselves about making military life work. Elena's experience was similar, but focused on financial anxiety. Rachel had somehow learned about Elena's husband's delayed promotion and used it as ammunition to suggest that military careers were dead ends, that Elena was wasting her prime years waiting for stability that would never come. Beth's story was the most personal. Rachel had targeted her struggles with infertility, making comments about how lucky she was not to bring children into the instability of military life, how her inability to conceive was probably a blessing in disguise. When I called David back with my findings, his reaction was swift and decisive. "She's not working alone," he said immediately. "This level of specific, personal information about military families requires coordination, planning, and resources that your sister doesn't have access to independently." "What do you mean?" "I mean, someone is feeding her intelligence about our community. Someone with access to personnel files, financial records, medical information. This isn't gossip, Karen. This is targeted psychological warfare against military families." The implications hit me like a physical blow. You think there's someone on base involved? I think there's someone with legitimate access who's providing information to your sister, either knowingly or unknowingly. And I think we're about to find out who. David's voice took on the tone that had enemy commanders surrender without firing a shot. "I'm initiating a security review effective immediately. Full background checks on anyone with access to family services, medical records, financial counseling, and base social services. If someone is leaking personal information about military families, they're going to face federal charges." The weight of what he was.
David's investigation moved with the efficiency of a military operation. Within 36 hours, he called me back with news that made my blood run cold. "We found the leak," he said without preamble. "Dr. Jennifer Morrison, the base family counselor. She's been in a relationship with someone matching Rachel's description for the past 8 months." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Morrison had counseled dozens of military families, had access to their most private struggles, their deepest fears, their financial situations, their marriage problems, their medical issues. "Rachel's been dating her?" I managed to ask. More than dating. According to our investigation, Dr. Morrison has been systematically documenting family vulnerabilities and sharing them with someone she believed was conducting research for a book about military family dynamics. Your sister convinced her it was for a positive project aimed at helping military families. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Rachel had seduced a military family counselor, gained access to confidential information about vulnerable families, and then used that intelligence to launch targeted psychological attacks. There's more, David continued, his voice grim. Dr. Morrison wasn't the only source. Rachel has cultivated relationships with 3 other base personnel over the past year: a financial counselor, a medical records clerk, and someone in housing services. She's been building a comprehensive intelligence network. My God, David, how many families has she targeted? We've identified at least 15 families who've had interactions with your sister in the past 6 months. All of them reported increased anxiety, depression, or marital problems following contact with her. Karen, your sister has been conducting a systematic campaign to destabilize military families. The scope of Rachel's operation left me speechless. This wasn't sibling rivalry or personal jealousy. This was something approaching psychological terrorism aimed at the military community. Why? I finally asked. What could she possibly gain from this? David's pause was heavy with implications. We're still investigating, but we've found some interesting connections. Rachel's pharmaceutical company has been developing contracts with mental health providers specifically targeting military families. Her region has shown remarkable growth in prescriptions for anxiety and depression medications among military dependents. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Rachel hadn't been targeting military families out of personal malice. She'd been creating a market for her products by systematically undermining the mental health of military wives and children. She's been making money off this, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. She's been destroying families to boost her sales numbers. That's our working theory. The pharmaceutical company she works for has paid her substantial bonuses for expansion into military markets. We believe she's been documenting the effectiveness of her techniques and using the data to refine her approach. I felt sick, thinking about all the women who'd been targeted, all the families whose struggles had been weaponized for corporate profit. Sarah's homeschooling doubts, Elena's financial fears, Beth's infertility pain, all of it had been calculated manipulation designed to drive them toward medication and therapy. What happens now? I asked. Now, your sister faces federal charges for conspiracy, violation of privacy laws, and potentially espionage, depending on how the military classifies her actions against active-duty families. David's voice carried the cold finality of military justice. Dr. Morrison and the other base personnel she compromised are looking at court-martial proceedings and federal prosecution. The satisfaction I expected to feel at Rachel's downfall was overshadowed by the magnitude of harm she'd caused. David, what about all the families she hurt, the women who are still struggling with the doubts she planted? I'm implementing a comprehensive support program. Every family that had contact with your sister will receive counseling, financial assistance if needed, and priority access to family services. We're also conducting a base-wide security review to prevent this kind of infiltration in the future. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a personal edge that cut through his professional composure. But first, your sister is going to learn what happens when someone targets my family. What do you mean? I mean, Rachel doesn't know yet that we've discovered her operation. She's expecting to continue her campaign, probably planning to escalate her attacks on you now that she's established initial contact. David's tone became predatory. She's about to receive a very educational introduction to the resources available to a 3-star general who's had his pregnant wife targeted by a hostile operative. The implications of his words sent chills down my spine. But for the first time since Rachel's attack in my living room, I felt something other than fear and hurt. I felt the fierce protection of a husband who commanded strategic operations across entire theaters of war, who had just learned that someone had been systematically targeting military families under his protection. Rachel had made the mistake of treating this as a game where she held all the cards.
She was about to discover that she'd been playing against an opponent who wrote the rules of engagement at levels she couldn't even comprehend. Rachel's phone call came exactly when David predicted it would, 3 days after his investigation concluded, right when she would expect me to be at my most vulnerable and isolated. "Karen, sweetie," her voice dripped with false concern. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I realize I may have been a bit harsh. I'm worried about you." I was ready for her. David had coached me through this call and had prepared me for every manipulation she might attempt. "I appreciate your concern, Rachel. I mean, you looked so shocked when I pointed out the realities of your situation. I hope you're not in denial about what you're facing." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "Have you thought about what we discussed? About whether bringing a baby into such an unstable situation is really fair?" The calculated cruelty was breathtaking, but this time I was prepared. "Actually, Rachel, I have been thinking about what you said, especially the part about how you knew so much about military family statistics and personal details about my neighbors." The silence on her end was telling. "I don't know what you mean." "I mean, it's fascinating how well-researched your attack was. Sarah's homeschooling situation, Elena's financial problems, Beth's fertility struggles. You seem to know intimate details about women you barely interact with." People talk, Karen. It's a small community." "Is it? Because I've been talking to those women, and they all remember very specific conversations with you. Conversations where you targeted their exact vulnerabilities with surgical precision." I kept my voice steady, professional, channeling David's tactical approach. "Almost like you had access to confidential information about military families." The pause stretched long enough for me to know I'd hit the target. When Rachel spoke again, her voice had lost its fake concern and taken on a defensive edge. "I don't appreciate what you're implying."
I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You've been systematically targeting military families with psychological attacks designed to destabilize their marriages and mental health. The question is why? You're being paranoid, Karen. Pregnancy hormones can make you imagine. Dr. Jennifer Morrison, I interrupted. Dr. Elena Martinez, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, Lisa Williams from Housing Services. Each name hit like a physical blow. I could practically hear Rachel's sharp intake of breath as she realized her network had been exposed. "I don't know what you think you're playing at," she said, but her voice had gone cold and calculating. "But you're making a serious mistake." "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're the one who made the mistake. You targeted the wrong family, Rachel." That's when I heard it, the sound that made my heart race with vindication and terror in equal measure. The distinctive whir of helicopter rotors growing closer to my house. "Rachel," I said, watching through my window as 2 black helicopters circled overhead before landing on the street in front of my house. "I need to go. There are some people here who want to talk to you." "What are you talking about?" Military vehicles were pulling up now, official cars with federal license plates, personnel in dress uniforms, men and women whose bearings screamed federal law enforcement. Through my front window, I watched a 3-star general step out of the lead vehicle, his uniform crisp despite the long flight from his classified location in the Pacific. "David's home," I said simply. The silence on Rachel's end was profound, but I could hear her sharp breathing as the implications sank in. "You see, Rachel, you made one critical miscalculation in your little operation. You assumed you were targeting isolated military wives with no real power or protection. You assumed we were vulnerable." David was walking up my front steps now, accompanied by what looked like a full federal investigation team. Behind them, I could see neighbors gathering on their porches, drawn by the unprecedented display of military authority descending on our quiet street. "But you weren't targeting random military families, Rachel," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "You were targeting the families of service members under the command of a 3-star general with access to resources you can't even imagine. You were conducting psychological operations against personnel under the protection of someone who writes policy for the entire Pacific Theater." David knocked once on the front door, a polite formality since it was his own house, before entering with his team.
You attacked military families, Rachel. You compromised base security. You infiltrated federal installations. You targeted classified personnel. I paused, watching David's team efficiently set up what looked like a command center in my living room. And you did it all while thinking you were playing a game where you held the power. Karen, you need to listen to me. No, Rachel, you need to listen to me. In about 30 seconds, federal agents are going to be knocking on your door with warrants for your arrest. You're going to be charged with conspiracy, violation of federal privacy laws, and potentially espionage, depending on how they classify your actions. David appeared in the doorway, still in full dress uniform, his expression carrying the kind of authority that had made enemy nations reconsider their positions. He nodded to me, a gesture that conveyed both personal love and professional approval. Dr. Morrison is already in custody, I continued, watching David's team coordinate what was clearly a multi-jurisdictional operation. So are your other sources. We have documentation of your entire network, records of every family you targeted, evidence of every manipulation you orchestrated. Rachel's breathing was audible now, sharp and panicked. But here's what you really need to understand, I said, my hand moving instinctively to my belly where our child was growing strong and safe. You didn't just attack me, Rachel. You attacked my family. You targeted the wife of a commanding general. You threatened his unborn child. David was walking toward me now, removing his dress gloves with the deliberate precision of a man preparing for action. And now, you're going to learn exactly why that was the biggest mistake of your life. I ended the call and turned to my husband, who pulled me into an embrace that conveyed both the gentleness of a man protecting his pregnant wife and the steel of a general who just eliminated a threat to his command. Outside, I could hear more vehicles arriving, the coordinated movement of a federal operation that had been planned with military precision and executed with the full authority of the United States Air Force. The federal operation that unfolded over the next 72 hours was unlike anything our quiet Colorado Springs community had ever witnessed. David had coordinated with the FBI, military intelligence, and federal prosecutors to execute simultaneous arrests across 3 states. Rachel was taken into custody at her Denver apartment at exactly 0600 hours, the same time agents were arresting Dr. Morrison and the other compromised base personnel. The coordination was flawless, preventing any opportunity for evidence destruction or communication between co-conspirators. I watched it all unfold from the secure briefing room David had set up in our house, surrounded by legal advisors, victim advocates, and military personnel who treated me with deference due to both a victim and the wife of their commanding officer. Dr. Morrison is already in custody, I continued. So are your other sources. We have documentation of your entire network, records of every family you targeted, evidence of every manipulation you orchestrated. Rachel's breathing was audible now, sharp and panicked. But here's what you really need to understand, I said, my hand moving instinctively to my belly where our child was growing strong and safe. You didn't just attack me, Rachel. You attacked my family. You targeted the wife of a commanding general. You threatened his unborn child. David was walking toward me now, removing his dress gloves with the deliberate precision of a man preparing for action. And now, you're going to learn exactly why that was the biggest mistake of your life. I ended the call and turned to my husband, who pulled me into an embrace that conveyed both the gentleness of a man protecting his pregnant wife and the steel of a general who just eliminated a threat to his command. Outside, I could hear more vehicles arriving, the coordinated movement of a federal operation that had been planned with military precision and executed with the full authority of the United States Air Force. The federal operation that unfolded over the next 72 hours was unlike anything our quiet Colorado Springs community had ever witnessed. David had coordinated with the FBI, military intelligence, and federal prosecutors to execute simultaneous arrests across 3 states. Rachel was taken into custody at her Denver apartment at exactly 0600 hours, the same time agents were arresting Dr. Morrison and the other compromised base personnel. The coordination was flawless, preventing any opportunity for evidence destruction or communication between co-conspirators.
I watched it all unfold from the secure briefing room David had set up in our house, surrounded by legal advisors, victim advocates, and military personnel who treated me with deference due to both a victim and the wife of their commanding officer. The pharmaceutical company is claiming ignorance, Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI reported. They're saying Rachel operated independently, that they never authorized her methods for market expansion. David's expression suggested he wasn't buying their denials. What does the evidence show? Email communications between Rachel and her regional manager discussing creative approaches to market development in military communities, bonus structures directly tied to prescription increases in her assigned territories, performance evaluations that praised her innovative client acquisition strategies. Agent Chen pulled up a projection showing the correlation between Rachel's activities and pharmaceutical sales in military communities. The graphs were damning. Every area where Rachel had targeted families showed corresponding spikes in mental health prescriptions and therapy appointments. They knew, David said with finality. Corporate prosecution? Federal prosecutors are reviewing RICO charges against the entire regional operation. Rachel wasn't the only rep using these methods. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. What we thought was my sister's personal vendetta against military families had been part of a systematic corporate strategy to create mental health crises that would drive prescription sales. My phone rang with a call from Mom, who'd been fielding calls from reporters since Rachel's arrest had become public. The story had exploded across military and mainstream media. A pharmaceutical sales rep infiltrating military bases to target families with psychological operations designed to boost antidepressant sales. Karen, honey, Mom's voice was shaky with shock and guilt. I had no idea. All those years of Rachel's comments about military families, her questions about your friends, I thought it was just her personality.
None of us knew, Mom. She was very good at what she did. The reporters are asking if you'll give interviews. They want to know about the family impact, about how this affected military wives. David took the phone from me, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Patterson, Karen won't be giving any media interviews during her pregnancy. Any statements will come through military public affairs when she's ready. It was a protection I needed. The media attention had been intense. News vans lined our street, reporters called constantly, and social media was buzzing with outrage about the targeting of military families. David had arranged for security personnel to screen our calls and monitor our property, treating the situation with the seriousness of a threat against military personnel. That evening, as we sat in our living room, finally alone for the first time in 3 days, David showed me the full scope of what his investigation had uncovered. 17 military families were directly targeted by Rachel over 8 months, he said, spreading photos and documents across our coffee table. An average increase of 340% in mental health medication usage among those families, 6 marriage separations, 3 divorce proceedings, 2 suicide attempts. The human cost of Rachel's operation was devastating. Real families had been destroyed by her calculated manipulations. Children had been traumatized, marriages had been ended by doubts she deliberately planted. What happens to those families now? I asked. Full support services, priority counseling, financial assistance where needed. The Air Force is treating them as casualties of a hostile operation. David's jaw tightened. Some of the damage may be permanent, but we're going to ensure every affected family gets whatever support they need to rebuild. He pulled out another document, Rachel's signed confession. After 12 hours of federal interrogation, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of decades in federal prison, she'd agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. She gave up everything, David said, the entire pharmaceutical network, all her contacts, detailed documentation of her methods. In exchange, she'll serve 15 years instead of 30. 15 years, I repeated, trying to process the magnitude of her fall from successful sales executive to federal prisoner. Federal prison, no possibility of parole for 7 years, complete restitution to affected families, lifetime ban from working in healthcare or pharmaceutical industries, and she's required to participate in a victim impact program where she'll have to face the families she targeted. The justice felt comprehensive, but somehow inadequate given the scope of harm she'd caused. But as I looked around our living room, at the ultrasound photo now displayed in a place of honor, At David's uniform hanging neatly in the closet, at the evidence of our life together, I realized that Rachel's ultimate failure wasn't just legal. She'd tried to destroy what we'd built together, to prove that military marriages were inherently unstable and doomed. Instead, her attack had demonstrated the opposite. When our family had been threatened, David had moved heaven and earth to protect us. He'd mobilized federal resources, coordinated multi-agency operations, and brought the full weight of military justice to bear on those who targeted us. She tried to prove that military families were weak, I said, my hand moving to my growing belly. Instead, she proved how strong we actually are. David pulled me close, his embrace encompassing both the gentleness of an expectant father and the strength of a general who just successfully completed a mission to protect his personnel. She made one critical mistake, he said. She underestimated what someone will do to protect their family. Outside, our neighborhood was quiet again. The media vans and official vehicles gone, normalcy restored to the community Rachel had tried to tear apart. But the security of knowing that anyone who threatened military families would face the full consequences of their actions remained. 6 months later, I stood in the nursery putting finishing touches on the room that had become a symbol of everything Rachel had tried to destroy and everything we'd fought to protect. The walls were painted a soft yellow, gender neutral because we decided to be surprised, and David's homecoming timeline was marked in careful detail on the calendar. He'd managed to arrange his schedule so that he'd be stateside for the last month of my pregnancy and the first 3 months of the baby's life. The Air Force, recognizing the unique circumstances of our situation and David's exemplary service record, had accommodated the request without hesitation. The phone rang, and I smiled, seeing Sarah Mitchell's name on the display. The military wives who'd been targeted by Rachel had formed an unexpected support network, bonding over our shared experience and commitment to preventing anything like it from happening again. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked immediately. "Any contractions yet?" "Just Braxton Hicks, but David's convinced the baby is going to arrive early. He's been timing everything obsessively." I laughed, settling into the rocking chair he'd assembled the day after returning from deployment. "How's your family counseling program going?" Sarah had channeled her experience into advocacy, working with base family services to develop new protocols for protecting military families from exploitation and manipulation. "We're expanding to 3 more bases next month. The Air Force is taking this seriously. Comprehensive background checks for anyone with access to family information, regular security reviews, and trauma-informed support for families who've been targeted." It was gratifying to know that some good had come from our nightmare. The scandal had prompted military-wide reforms in how family services operated, with new safeguards designed to prevent the kind of infiltration Rachel had achieved. "Any word from your sister?" Sarah asked, the question that everyone seemed to avoid but couldn't help wondering about. "She wrote from prison," I said, my hand automatically moving to my belly where the baby was currently performing what felt like gymnastics routines. An apology letter that her lawyers probably wrote. "Mom wants me to consider visiting her, but you're focused on your own family," Sarah finished, understanding implicitly in her voice. "Exactly. I can't undo the damage she caused, and I can't fix whatever broke inside her that made her think targeting families was acceptable. What I can do is focus on building something strong and healthy for my child." The sound of a car in our driveway interrupted our conversation, and I felt the familiar flutter of excitement that accompanied David's return from any absence, even just a trip to the commissary. "I have to go," I told Sarah. "David's home, and he gets worried if I'm not where he expects me to be." It was a protective streak that had intensified since Rachel's attack, but I didn't mind. After everything we'd been through, the knowledge that someone would move mountains to keep us safe felt like the most precious gift imaginable. David appeared in the nursery doorway, carrying grocery bags and wearing the expression of a man who was still adjusting to being home, to being present for all the small moments of pregnancy that deployment had previously made him miss. "How are my 2 favorite people?" he asked, setting down the bags and immediately moving to check on me, a ritual that had become second nature since his return. "Your favorite people are fine, but your favorite person is getting increasingly impatient about meeting you," I said, guiding his hand to where the baby was currently pressing against my ribs. David's face lit up with the wonder that appeared every time he felt the baby move. Strong kicks, definitely going to be a soccer player. "Or a general," I suggested, with that kind of determination.
We spent the evening assembling the last pieces of baby furniture, David reading instruction manuals with the same attention to detail he brought to strategic planning. As we worked, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us here, from Rachel's attack to federal investigations to this peaceful evening preparing for our child's arrival. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Rachel hadn't targeted us? I asked, as David adjusted the mobile above the crib for the third time, ensuring it hung at exactly the right height. No, he said without hesitation, because she did target us, and we dealt with it, and now we're here. Speculation about alternate timelines is a luxury I can't afford when there's real work to be done. It was such a perfectly David response, practical, focused on outcomes rather than dwelling on what-ifs. It was also exactly what I needed to hear. Besides, he continued, testing the mobile's movement with scientific precision, if Rachel's attack proved anything, it's that we can handle whatever challenges come our way. Military families are stronger than people realize, and our family specifically has resources that most threats can't match. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, as if agreeing with David's assessment. We both laughed, the sound filling the nursery with the kind of joy Rachel had tried to convince us was impossible in military marriages. 3 weeks later, David William Patterson made his entrance into the world at 03:27 hours, early enough to surprise the medical staff, but perfectly timed according to David's prediction. He arrived weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces, with his father's determined expression and what the nurses swore was already a commanding presence. David held his son for the first time with the same steady hands that had signed deployment orders and strategic plans, but his expression was softer than I'd ever seen it. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He's ours," I corrected, and in that moment, surrounded by the man who'd moved heaven and earth to protect our family, and holding the child who represented everything we'd fought for, I understood something Rachel had never grasped. Military families weren't weak or broken or doomed to failure. We were adaptable, resilient, and protected by bonds that could withstand any attack. We were stronger than our challenges, more committed than our critics, and more powerful than anyone who underestimated what we were willing to do for each other. Rachel had tried to prove that military love was insufficient, that service families were inherently unstable. Instead, she'd demonstrated the opposite. She'd shown that when you threaten a military family, you don't just face one person's response, you face the full strength of a community, the resources of an institution, and the determination of people who've sworn oaths to protect what matters most. As I watched David carefully adjust our son's blanket with the same attention to detail he brought to commanding strategic operations, I smiled, knowing that little David would grow up understanding something his aunt had never learned. Real strength isn't about tearing others down to build yourself up. It's about building something so strong that it can withstand any storm and protect everyone you love. The story that had begun with cruelty and manipulation had ended with justice, healing, and the kind of unshakable family foundation that could weather any future challenges. And if anyone ever threatened our family again, they would learn the same lesson Rachel had learned, that military families don't just survive attacks, we emerge stronger than ever, with the full power of our convictions and our community behind us. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.